one thing that's in common among every writer, every storyteller I've ever met, in fact, every creative person, whether they're writing a novel, writing a symphony, making a sculpture, whatever it is, you need to somehow get active both sides of your brain. Now, neuroscience tells us that the right side of the brain is associated with the left hand, and that's the creative side that is like our dream self, our side of the brain that writes poetry, our side that makes metaphors. This side of the brain, which is associated with the other hand, is the logical, rational side of our brain, that actually is the side we use when we try to figure out how we get from A to B, or what is the answer to a mathematical equation, or how do we plan out the 25 steps that we need to have work in order to make a movie or write a book or have a character grow in all the ways that it's necessary to grow to feel believable. So you can see how to write a book, you need to have both sides of the brain engaged. You have to have them both working. You have to have that creative, mysterious, poetic side, and you have to have the logical, rational side, both working at once. Now, how you do that is completely individual. For me, what it takes is I always start out by dreaming. I always start out by just kind of letting my mind flow and getting a sense of what is elemental about this place, what is really special, what is really magical about this story, this character, what catches me about that character's deepest secrets, what pulls me into that place, what are the big issues. I just dream a bit. And then I switch to the left side of my brain, the right hand, and I write an outline, a really specific outline of the whole journey. And in a way, that outline is like a map, but from a high distance. It's like a satellite view of the terrain that we have to cover. So imagine yourself walking on this terrain and covering in the way that Tamwin does, where he climbs all the way from the tip of Stone Root up through the inside of the trunk, all the way out to the branches, all the way to the stars. In a way, that's a journey that I have to visualize in the map. Sometimes the rational, logical side of my brain says all the character has to do is walk up to here and turn right and go that direction. But the dream side of my brain says, no, you know, that character's real motivation is to go over there. And so you make a U-turn and the story changes. And in that kind of a situation, you have to listen to the character. The character has to have an integrity of his or her own, and you really, as an author, have to respect that. If you don't, if you just do what the outline said, smart readers like you guys will just say, I don't believe that. That's not true. That's not what that person would do. When I began the Merlin stories, I actually started writing them in the third person. A boy washes ashore. He meets this wonderful gal named Rhea, who teaches him the voices of the forest, although she doesn't reveal yet who she really is. Together they have this great adventure. There's a little fellow who actually thinks he's a giant named Shim. They destroy the castle. All kinds of mysteries take place and unravel, and that's the story of Merlin. But then I realized this is Merlin's most personal story. This is the story of his untold youth. This is the story of his lost years. This is the story of what happened that made it possible for him to become the greatest wizard of all times. So it really has to be told by Merlin himself. That's when I stopped everything and started writing all over in the first person. But there was a problem. I didn't really hear Merlin's voice. And whenever I would think about Merlin's voice, I was hearing the voice of this great elder wizard, the wizard from T.H. White's Once and Future King, the wizard from Camelot, the wizard we all know about, who is hundreds of years old and really wise and warm and charismatic, but ancient. And I needed to back him down from that to a 12-year-old boy who was vulnerable and weak and confused, lost and alone, who had no idea that he had any future at all, let alone a great, glorious, magical future. And when I finally started hearing his voice as a 12-year-old, I started again to write the books, and that's why all 5 books are in Merlin's voice as the young man, who's revealing for the first time the secret of his lost years. When I first heard Merlin's voice, that was an amazing moment. It was when I was at my writing desk way late at night. It was 2:30 in the morning. And just outside my window in the attic of our house is a big cottonwood tree. Every so often in the springtime, a great horned owl will sit in that tree and he'll hoot in the nighttime. And those hoots echo all around in the night air. And that night, an owl hooted maybe just an arm's length from my window, and he went hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo, in that wonderful haunting voice. And in that moment, I suddenly heard something in the rhythm, in the cadence, in the timbre of his voice. I suddenly heard what I needed to hear. And I started writing right then the new first draft with Merlin telling his own story. That's when I wrote the opening lines that go, "Oh, when I close my eyes and breathe to the rolling rhythm of the sea." That's where it begins. So you can see how the creative process is going here, Phoebe. It's really happening, and you toggle back and forth between both sides of the brain. And as I do rewrites, I actually keep a notepad by my bed. I keep a notepad with me when I go for walks and runs, and when I'm playing with our kids or doing anything outside, I keep a way to jot down things that bubble up in that side of the brain. The writing process is still at its core mysterious to me. I'll give you one example. Last spring, I went on a trip to Alaska, dog sledding with my son, Ben, and we were way out in the middle of the interior of Alaska. It was 30 below zero while we were running our dog sleds right below Mount Denali, the largest peak in North America. It was an amazing moment, but it was cold. And I remember suddenly in the middle of that dog sled having an idea about my Avalon books. And it was, in the most bizarre way, it was about a people who are always aflame, the fire angels, and whose bodies, when they are healthy and their souls are fulfilled, are bright and full of fire, but who now are just smoking shadows. Well, that idea hit me, even though it's about fire and warmth, it hit me when it was 30 below zero in the middle of a dog sled trail in Alaska. So I actually stopped the dog sled and took out of my pocket my little pencil and paper, and I made some notes. And I'm blowing frosty clouds, and the dogs are eager to get going, and my son Ben is way ahead, and he's thinking, what is Dad stopping for in the middle of this very, very cold place? That's what happens. Ideas come. I have no idea why that idea came at that moment, at that place, but it did, and it's now in the Avalon books. It just happened. I can't possibly explain it.